What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn about why Canadians hate American tourists. Oh my. You know what this makes me think of? All the times in my videos that I've been learning about a really, really cool place in Canada. And I've been like, Americans gotta visit Canada more. I gotta tell more Americans about all these places they need to go in Canada. And Canadians are just watching, going, no! Stop him! No! Stop it! And you know what? I don't blame you, honestly. I have a bit of a theory about why Americans make for such bad tourists around the world in places like Canada. I think it has to do with American culture. You know, Americans certainly have a culture of thinking we do everything the best, the right way. We are the best at everything. Our culture is the best. So that definitely makes it so when Americans travel outside of the United States, they usually don't bother to learn about the culture of wherever they are traveling to. They just act like Americans, and they, funny enough, it wouldn't even be that bad, except they bring the American culture and kind of stereotypical way of acting, of being very loud and disrespectful and really just prioritizing their own experience of the country rather than prioritizing, you know, having a nice time, but also respecting the culture of where you are. It's not the United States. So it is up to you as the guest to, you know, go out of your way and learn something. So I thought it would be very interesting today to learn about some of the specific things Canadians really, really do not like about American tourists, which will be, I think, pretty entertaining for me, educational as well. So let's take a look.
And so I want to give you some of the kind of typical things that tourists do that upset the Canadians. And I think the first thing, and if you look online, people will say, oh, call them Americans. That's going to upset them the most. Well, it's not necessarily calling them Americans that upsets.
Call Canadians Americans? What on... I mean, that... Who would even do that? Americans wouldn't do that. Like, Americans are Americans and love being Americans, so I don't think they'd be the ones calling Canadians Americans, but I absolutely would see why Canadians would take offense to being called Americans. I guess that's from maybe people traveling to Canada from other cultures. I mean, Canada and the United States, we're in North America, but everyone knows, like, America is the United States, it's its own thing, and Canada is its own thing. I would understand if Canadians were annoyed and offended by that, honestly.
It's more not noticing or acknowledging or appreciating true Canadian culture and how Canada is really its own distinct country, its own distinct culture with its own people. It's not just the politics and maple syrup and hockey.
It's not just the maple syrup and hockey. There's more to Canada than that, obviously. You know what's also interesting about this is I think Americans are really, really guilty of this, of assuming Canada is so similar to the United States that Americans probably presume they can just visit Canada and nothing will really be different. There really won't be any different social norms or customs or behaviors, when in fact there are some pretty substantial differences, honestly.
No. There's so much more that makes Canada Canada. Their melting pot is very different than the melting pot of the U.S. or other places around the world.
True.
And not appreciating the differences of Canadian culture is really what hurts them. So that's the first thing. It's just not appreciating the Canadian difference that's out there.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Not appreciating the Canadian culture, not bothering to learn anything at all about Canadian culture before traveling to Canada.
But yeah, the second thing that'll really piss them off if you tell them they're Americans or you're in the 51st state. Yeah, that will still get them.
God. Oh my God, the 51st state, or calling Canadians Americans. I mean, I honestly think that's the one way you might get some Canadians into a fight with you. You'd be in a fight if you start using, those are fighting words right there.
I want to give you kind of the background on that one, okay? Now, the next thing that might upset the locals when you're here is if you try to imitate a Canadian accent. You know, you want to say, sorry, I said something.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. Oh my gosh, that's so cringe, honestly, to even think of. I have secondhand embarrassment thinking about Americans who have ever gone to Canada and tried to imitate the accent, especially if they did the stereotypical Canadian accent Americans think of. That is just... Because that seems to me like that wouldn't really be in good humor. It'd come across as poking fun or something, making fun of.
Sorry, or you want to sound like you're, Bob and Doug McKenzie from back in the day, right? Some strange fruit. Here's my two. Can I go? Let's go get a 2-4. Look,
right.
Don't imitate the accent. No one appreciates that. No matter where you are in the world, people don't appreciate when you mock their accents or mock their vocabulary.
Exactly. This extends further than Canada. Like wherever you go in the world, usually it's not a good idea to make fun of people's accents. Like what?
It's no different here in Canada. So as much as you want to say a to a thing or sorry, I mean, you can say sorry. I'll talk about that later. But just in general, mocking the accent and stuff, that might...
Don't use any stereotypical Canadian language or do an over-exaggerated accent, but it's okay if you say sorry. That is okay.
Put people on the wrong foot with you, okay?
Yeah.
Now, another thing that's a really touchy subject with Canadians that you might not know about if you're not from here is that's if you kind of bring up the fact that Tim Hortons just hasn't been the same since it changed ownership. I mean...
This is like way too specific for an American to bring up. I think there's Tim Hortons when you get in the United States when you get close to the Canadian border, but by and large, no Americans don't even know about Tim Hortons, like, most of the time, let alone enough to comment on how it's changed, it's gone downhill since the new leadership. I would be like, what? How do you even know about that? I'm just impressed. You've been studying your Canadian Timmy's culture. Wow.
Tim Hortons is like, it's a thing here in Canada. It was like the place you went to get your coffee and your Timbits, your little donut holes. It was just like a truly culturally Canadian thing. It was something we were proud of. And then it kind of changed ownership, and now it's still better than Starbucks, I think. And
I mean, this almost sounds like something the Canadians would say, honestly. It's okay if Canadians say this, and I imagine some talk about this. Like, oh, is Timmy's good? Is it bad? It's changed ownership to this and that. But I would be surprised if Americans ever brought this up, honestly.
And it's a very touchy subject for people in Canada, so just be aware that if you bring up Tim Hortons or you make jokes about it, they'll probably bring up the fact that Timmy's, it's not what it used to be. Now, another thing is, it doesn't matter if you're at Timmy's or you're anywhere, another thing that's going to upset the locals is if you line jump or queue jump. Look, here in Canada...
Oh my gosh, yeah, queue jumping. Do Canadians call it a queue? I think, like in America, we call it a line. I know the UK calls it a queue, queuing. Waiting in line. Don't cut in line. Americans are so frustratingly, annoyingly bad at this. And the thing is, it's like you'll run into Americans that are just trying to be malicious and jump in line on purpose. But then the other parts of the time, Americans will pretend, or maybe it's genuine, if you're not perfectly in line, if you're giving a little space between you and the next person, or if you're kind of off to the side, Americans will just cut in front of you and act like, oh, you didn't look like you were in line, so you're not in line, and not even ask. And it comes across as on purpose some of the time and just kind of ignorant the rest of the time, and it's very American and happens a little too often than I'd like to admit.
Line culture is a thing. I mean, I was at the Montreal train station a few days ago waiting to get my train. The line to get on the train, no joke, single file line, went the entire length of the hall, the Great Hall, and then around a hallway as well. And everybody was very nice and waited their turn and everything.
That is comical. Comical to imagine happening in the United States. Like, it's a free-for-all. When there are lines, say at the grocery store, because there's literally shelves to dictate where the line is, thank goodness, Americans will obey in general or try to be sneaky. But if it's just like an elevator or a train or a subway or a train, good luck. Like, just survive at that point and get on board and hold on for dear life.
And line culture is very much a thing here. And if you jump the line, people are going to be upset with you. They might say sorry and get your attention, but yeah, that's something you don't do here. Okay.
I really love that. Honestly, it speaks really highly about it speaks about Canadian culture in general. There's just more of an attitude of respect. I think that seems so basic. I know, but it's kind of sad in my mind that, to me, that's like above and beyond. It's special. It's like, wow, Canadians are very orderly and respectful, and that's so nice. Whereas that should be the norm, but a lot of times it's not, sadly. So I could see Americans definitely pushing it with this in Canada and coming across, I don't know, very annoying.
Okay. And I know I keep saying sorry and things like that, but I think sorry is another thing that will upset the locals if you don't say you're sorry. Because Canadians are actually very nice people and they're very polite. And so, yes, they do use sorry a lot and they do say excuse me a lot and all kinds of stuff. But yes, sorry is a thing. So if someone tells you
sorry, wow, yeah, that's definitely very different. In this one, I could see I could make this mistake as an American, even though I'm trying to be conscious of Canadian culture. It's just that in America, it's not very common or expected to say sorry for lots of things. Our threshold is way, way, way smaller. I think we just talk to each other a lot more abruptly and straightforward and a little more rude, to be honest. But it's not considered rude. It's just considered normal. That's such a funny way to think about it. Now that I am thinking about it, is all the time in daily life, people do stuff where they could say sorry, I guess, but they don't, and I am not offended. It's just normal. So that barometer, that threshold of what is rude, is so different between cultures like Canada and the United States that I could see this happening a lot with American tourists, honestly, and not on purpose.
Sorry, it's okay to say sorry back. If you bump into somebody, sorry is an answer. If you accidentally order wrong or you want something else, sorry, could I get some more ketchup? Sorry is a word you need to use when you're here, so don't forget your manners, because nobody wants a mannerless tourist.
Right, like I'm trying to think of an example. If someone bumped into me and said sorry in Canada, I might say, no problem, or, oh, you're fine. I wouldn't say sorry necessarily back. And I wonder if that would come across as rude, even though I think that's just normal, I guess.
And speaking of a mannerless tourist, another thing that might upset the locals is if you don't tip your waiters. Look, a lot of people, we have so many comments on our videos about tipping in the U.S. People get so upset about it. But you know what? Here in Canada, they tip as well.
That's actually thank goodness there's some similarities that Americans don't have to worry about. In America, tipping culture is out of control. You got to tip for everything. Tip your barber, tip your hairdresser, tip your waiter, tip the bar, tip the person who parks your car. You just got to tip everybody. Tip your doctor. No, I'm just kidding. Do not do that. Although I don't know, maybe they throw you a couple. It is American healthcare. Maybe they'd get you your medicine a little faster there or whatever. But tipping culture is alive and well in America. I don't know, you tip like 15-20% when you're at a restaurant and stuff. And if you don't tip in America, it's extremely rude. And you're probably going to stick out and be remembered. So I don't know if it's quite that harsh in Canada, but sounds like tipping is the norm. It is expected, and it sounds about the same.
Between 15 and 20%. And the thing is, if you tip with credit card, they're pretty slick. They'll give you an option with the machine, 18%, 20%, or 22%. But tipping is a thing here in Canada. They do it. I've
seen like a meme about this, or like a joke on the internet, where it's like someone holds the door open for you to be polite and then holds out a credit card scanner saying like tip 10%, 15%, 20%. And it's like, God, they're getting us they're getting us for tips on everything.
You need to do it too. It doesn't matter if in your home country, oh, we don't tip, or I don't believe in tipping. Tipping is wrong. It doesn't matter. That's how people make a living here in Canada. Here in Toronto, it's not cheap. You need those tips to survive, okay? So don't be a jerk, cheap tourist. Pay the tips. Tip your waiters.
It is actually... This is kind of a tip for non-Americans, actually. This isn't really a why Canadians should hate American tourists kind of thing. I think American tourists, we know to tip. It's normal here. Probably do it in Canada. And although Americans are very judgmental when we tip. Like, Americans will literally, maybe that's a difference. Americans, when at a restaurant, will definitely actually judge the performance of the waiter or waitress. How much they refilled their drink, how fast they got the food, if they got the order correctly, and will definitely like make a judgment and base the tip off of that. And I've seen Americans leave terrible tips, 0 tip, or amazing tips if you're an amazing server. So Americans definitely take that opportunity to be the judge, jury, and executioner of tips in restaurants. I don't know if it's like that extreme in Canada. I get the feeling Canadians are probably a little more in general. If the waiter does a good job, they get a good tip. And that's about where it ends. They'd have to really mess up to get a bad tip, I imagine. So that might be a difference between our tipping cultures. So, I see we're about halfway through this video. And I'm very much enjoying it a lot. This is giving me quite a kick. Out of all the things Americans need to watch this and just be like, don't do these things. Except tipping. Do that. But all the rest of this stuff, don't do it, memorize it, and you might not be chased out of Canada. But I think I'm going to stop here for now and finish the rest in part 2. So if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment, perhaps with your opinion on some things that American tourists do that are annoying or that we need to do a little better. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, or if you want to see part 2, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.